Hey friends, we're off here again with the Louisville ProActivist Report. Thanks for joining me today. I'm in the middle of this interview series of talking to people involved in the protests here downtown, from activists to organizers to media. So this is the fourth in the series, so check out the other ones if you haven't already. But that brings me to my guest here today. She is an activist here locally, an organizer, a photographer, and just all around awesome person. Please welcome to the show, Sonja Wilde-de Vries.
Glad to be here.
Today.
Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So yeah, I see you everywhere, basically, everywhere, and it's amazing to see people get so involved. So, talk about really, going back to when you started with activism. What really got you motivated to kind of get involved, and what got you inspired?
Well, yeah, it goes way back for me. I was raised partly by a mom who had lived under Nazi occupation as a child, who came from a communist family, although my grandmother preferred to be identified as an anarcho-communist because she didn't like all the rigidity, which I appreciate. So from the get-go, I was raised in that kind of family. I ended up being actually raised by my grandmother more than anybody else in her home, where she had hid people from the Nazis under the floor, in her home where, the SS would come up the stairs on a regular basis and stick a gun into her belly when she was pregnant and ask where my grandfather was, because he was a known communist. And he ended up going to a concentration camp for a year and a half and escaping, thank goodness, toward the end of the war, when they sent all the prisoners to the east where they had gas chambers, because they had concentration camps in Holland but no gas chambers. And so I grew up with my grandmother telling me these amazing stories, not just of during Nazi occupation, but before, when they were receiving all these German refugees. Because Hitler, came to power some years before the occupation, and so they were receiving all these German refugees. Trade unionists, Jewish people, families, activists, who thought they'd be safe in Holland, which they were for a while. And then, of course, the occupation came, and they ended up, my grandmother was basically alone with her 3 kids and pregnant, and kept people there under the floor for the duration of the war, different people moving in and out. The whole family was involved. My Uncle Hari was a courier, so he rode a bicycle around town delivering messages and food and radios and stuff like that. My mother was younger, and so it was her job to try to take the kids out, like if there was a family, to the park or stuff like that. But my mother was she's almost 90 now. From the very beginning, during the bombing, when the Nazis were first occupying, she had been outspoken in her class, and she was only, 6 years old, 7 years old. And because she'd been outspoken against fascism and trying to raise money to send to Spain for the people who were fighting fascism there, she tried to gather toys. The teacher put her in a closet in the classroom when the bombing was happening and took everybody else to the bomb shelter. So she developed a strong sense of justice from a really early age. And so, those were the people who influenced me the most. And I grew up mostly over there, but when I came here, what struck me the most, I remember as a little white girl, was the racism. The racism of my friends, who I didn't expect it from, and it was not something I had seen in Holland, though let me tell you, racism is very much alive in Holland, and Holland was a colonial power and all that. So, but it's differently expressed at that time. And here, the family that lived closest to us was a black family, and so my childhood playmates were black. And the first time I really saw the extent of the racism was we were on a mini bike riding through some subdivision that was near where we lived, and I was on the back, and all of a sudden these little white kids come out with BB guns like they're protecting their turf and start shooting at us and calling, N-lover. And I was, maybe 7 or 8. And I still remember that feeling of like, oh my God, like they really hate us, and they hate me for being friends with, my friend Maurice. So to me, those things were always very connected. Just the global struggle for justice, against capitalism, against colonialism, against imperialism, against racism and white supremacy. And so it was kind of a natural unfolding. And I must say, I just saw a hummingbird. Yes, it's right there.
Just wants to hear what's going on.
We have to find the joy in life, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, so I was here mostly for high school, and that's when my activism around anti-racism started, because it was so much. It was so present. It was very present in my school. It was incredibly segregated, and there was a lot of hostility. It was present in the fact that the Klan was still marching here in Louisville, that the Klan was very much integrated into the police force, and Ann Braden, of course, was, here in Louisville, civil rights activist, white civil rights activist. And I got involved with my first activism with Ann Braden at the Braden Center down on Broadway.
She started a lot of people around here.
Yes. She did, and it was the natural thing for me to go to her,
Yeah.
And I was a terribly shy young girl. I don't even think I really talked to Ann at first. I was that shy. But I remember making flyers about Johnny Imani Harris, who was on death row. He was later, due to the massive campaign, freed. But that's how I got started, and then I came out as queer. Then at that point, this was 1981, the word was lesbian that I identified with. At that time, that was a radical word. Now it's like, and that further, I think, informed my activism. I felt like an outsider. I felt the oppression around that. And also having a history of sexual violence, I definitely felt the impact of being a woman in this society. So, I would say from early on, I understood to a certain degree, in a naive way that, 17-year-old white girl can, that fighting racism was central to every other struggle. And Ann Braden definitely, and Maddie Jones definitely helped me understand that.
Yeah, two legends in the community right there.
Yeah, Maddie's still with us.
I talked to almost everybody I interview seems to have connections to them.
Oh,
so.
yeah. I mean, Maddie is still very much a force. But the two of them, I mean, they had a way of bringing people in, they both had very generous spirits and very passionate and very intense, but there was a generosity about them, you know, because, I mean, I'm sure I was pretty naive at the time, and I always felt welcomed. And I think that's really important. You know, like, I keep that with me. I was lucky to have teachers who were generous and patient with me, and, you know, nobody can be that way all the time. But one of the things that I appreciate in Surge, showing up for racial justice, is one of the values that we have is to meet people where they are and to call people in terms of organizing, not in terms of the police. I want to make this very clear. We don't think calling the police in is going to get us anywhere.
Right.
That's not what it's about. It's about, you know, trying to organize more white people into anti-racism, into a multiracial fight against white supremacy and for justice. And, you know, a lot of new people don't know the history, don't, you know, have the experience. And if we're like, oh, what do you mean you don't know that? We have to welcome people and meet them where they are.
So talk a little bit, you brought up Surge there, talk a little bit more about what they're about and how you ended up hooking up with them.
Okay. Well, Surge came about around the time Obama was elected, when people of color and black organizations asked for white people to do more anti-racist organizing in predominantly white communities, because it was so clear that the work was not done. And that wasn't a new call. That had been a call back in the 70s too. Organize your own. You know, the Panthers and different groups encouraged white people to organize other white people. And so Surge was along those lines. I think, and I had always been organizing pretty much in that way. Like, I was part of multiracial organizations too around different issues. But as a young woman, I worked closely with accountability partners, like in the Puerto Rican independence movement and in the black movement. And, you know, our work was to organize more white people. So that part was familiar to me, but it had a very different culture. And so Surge was much more welcoming, a more loving kind of environment, for lack of a better way to describe it. There, you know, unfortunately, I think part of the dominant culture is a lot of shaming and blaming, which is not a good organizing tool.
Yeah, it just pushes people away. It
pushes people away. It doesn't open up conversations. I think I might have told you this story before, but when I was living in Western Massachusetts, I was close to an organization that mainly organized around the anti-Klan and anti-racism. And they had a paper, an anti-racist paper. And, you know, we're selling the paper on the street, and my friend, you know, asked this family, you know, would you like to buy the paper? And they said, the man, he said, oh, no, thank you. And she looked at me and she said, are you a racist or something? And, you know, of course, he looked at her like, oh my God, get me away from this woman. It was not an effective organizing tool.
Right.
You know? So I see that in our work, and it's not always easy, but my favorite work is knocking on people's doors, on strangers' doors, and talking to them about issues like police brutality, about immigration, cash bail, ending cash bail, because of those are the people we need to reach, you know?
What kind of reception do you get when you do that?
It's very mixed. I have had amazing conversations. I've had conversations from standing there for like 20 to 30 minutes talking to, I remember this white woman who was probably in her 50s, and at the end of the conversation she said, I've never had a conversation like this about racism. And that was really gratifying. And then, you know, people who this one guy slammed the door in my face. And then, he had said something very racist and anti-immigrant. And I was walking down the street, and he came back out and he said, "Young lady, would you please come back here? I don't feel very good about what I just did."
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And we didn't exactly come to an understanding, but he did hear me out.
Oh, nice.
And he was willing to listen. And, some people just out and out slam the door or say horrible things, which I don't need to repeat here. But I love the work because, like I said, I think those are the people we need to reach. And it's encouraging because what you see, for one, your stereotypes are challenged. I remember coming up to a door and there was an NRA sign and I think a sheriff sticker. And I thought, oh God, I don't know if I want to go knock on this door. Ended up, this woman was totally supportive of immigrant rights. And I've come across that so often where I'm thinking one way and then they surprise me. And I love to be surprised because sometimes we think we're alone in this or that not very many people agree with us, and it's really not true, And one of the things that really kind of affirmed that for me was Charles Booker's campaign.
Yeah.
To see that all over Kentucky, people were behind this young, black, visionary person who, was really talking about transformational change in the system. And he lost by a tiny little bit. So that to me, that tells me that Kentucky is way, way further ahead than we thought.
And if there wasn't a pandemic and a shortage of polling stations, who knows how that goes down. I think he might probably takes it, to be honest.
Yes.
But so close,
so close. But it was really exciting and hopeful, and just, yeah.
So that kind of brings us to the Breonna Taylor situation. Before we get into kind of how Surge is working on that, just tell me your initial thoughts when you first heard about what happened.
I, like a lot of people, really didn't hear about it until quite a bit after the fact. Like, I don't remember hearing about what happened when it happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I've talked to a lot of people who've said the same thing. Yeah. I think it's partly how they framed what happened in the media, and partly that, we were first dealing with this pandemic and everybody was pretty occupied with that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think it was started to hear more in the media about what actually happened, and then they released the 911 call, right? Kenneth Walker's 911 call, and it was so clear, and I mean, it's just, when I first moved back to Kentucky in 2002, we had just had a bunch of police killings of black people. So it isn't like it was new. It was particularly horrible, I think, because this, Breonna was at home, where you would think that you would be safe,
Not there, where,
Yeah. If you can't be safe at home, sitting in your bed watching TV, then what does that mean? And, and so it came after a long history of no cops getting indicted or fired for any of the killings of unarmed black people. And, it just, I think it was a buildup. And also at the same time, we had such a clear, COVID-19 has made so clear to maybe people who weren't paying attention as much, all of the inequality and how brutally it manifests, in terms of healthcare, housing, etc. And so I think all of this kind of converged, and this beautiful young woman who, was a frontline worker, yeah.
Yeah, it was a tragic story.
Yes.
I guess the one good out of it is kind of seeing the community come together over this. So what do you think about the reaction the community's had toward this and what's been going on every night? What are day 60-something straight of protests now?
Yeah. Well, I think it's like I was referring to. I think it's just like been this buildup, and people just are at this point where it's like, no, we're done. Done with the police abuse and murder, done with the, white supremacy on every level and economic inequality on every level. And so it's a really amazing and exciting time, as well as being a very difficult and painful time. But this stuff has all been underlying, and so I think that's where the exciting comes in, is that people are coming together and saying, no, we're not going to accept this anymore. And so many young people, and so many, oh my God, so many amazing, especially black women in the leadership, across the country actually, but in Louisville, I just feel like, wow, we're so lucky to have such powerful leadership, and sure, not everybody agrees on everything. That's okay. It's never happened in the history of movements,
right.
Right. That's not new. People have disagreements, people have personality clashes. That's always been true of any movement, anywhere. But what has risen to the top is this continual, day after day, protesting, creativity, naming of injustices, responding to injustice, whether it's trying to stop evictions or dealing with the fact that so many people don't have homes or safe housing, and of course the core issue is the racism and the police abuse, and I think it's so important that people have named too that the police are basically there to control the consequences of having such a unequal, unjust society. They're there to keep it in place, and so it all I just feel like it's all coming to awareness to everybody. I mean, of course, people who live it have an awareness all the time, but it's different to, building a movement, and I was at a march the other day, and this young new leader, was talking about how we're centering the fight against police brutality. We're centering the fight against white supremacy and racism. And he said, but this system isn't working for very many people. He said, if you're LGBTQ, if you're poor or working class, if you're a woman, and he just listed, he said, we're all in this together. He said, we're not all affected the same, of course, but we all have a reason to fight the system. And I think, that is a really important thing to keep in mind. White folks have made the mistake way too many times of turning that into, so we need to be in leadership.
Right.
And it's like, no. I totally trust and know that we need to center black leadership, and I know that especially when black women are free, we'll all be free,
True.
And it doesn't work the other way around. It doesn't work the other way around. I remember when I was younger and the whole marriage equality thing was happening, and marriage equality is important, but all I could think of was, and if you're white, middle and upper class, they can do that. They can give us marriage equality without upsetting the system too much. You know, so not everybody gets free that way. You know, but when you have the most oppressed groups leading the struggle, we are all going to get free. And that to me is what is so exciting right now. And the movement for Black Lives, for folks who haven't looked them up and looked at their program, because someone was saying to me the other day, yeah, but what are we really fighting for? Is it just about police abuse? And I was like, go to the movement for Black Lives. They have a whole program, just like the Panthers did, except it's more expanded. And it includes things like LGBTQ rights and liberation, more than rights. And it includes Palestine, and it includes anti-capitalism. You know, and so that to me is so important. I honestly didn't think I would see this kind of uprising in my lifetime.
Yeah, same here.
You know, and some people, I was talking to somebody the other day, and she was like, yeah, but she's not an activist. She was like, yeah, I'm very sympathetic, but I want to go back to normal. And it's
normal
like,
for who? Yeah.
Yeah, normal for who? And like, why would we want to go back to normal? We can't, for one.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like the good old days.
Yeah.
Good for who?
Right.
You know? But yeah, I think it's an amazing time. And even, I was watching an interview with Angela Davis the other day, and she's now in her 70s and still very much the activist and brilliant. And she said, I've never seen anything like this in my life. And I think it really hit me then. I was like, wow, if Angela Davis is saying that, you know, the amount of people that, you know, white people are finally showing up, really showing up in large numbers against racism and white supremacy. That's, you know, very important. But the quality of leadership and the youth and just all these different factors, and it's pretty amazing.
So on that note, I think it was last week was the LGBTQ march, or was it 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, last week, I don't know.
It's hard to keep up at this point.
Yeah, it's very hard.
And then there's one here shortly that I'll be live streaming.
Yes.
Of course, this interview will come out after that, and I think you'll probably be there today as well.
Yes, definitely.
So kind of talk about where those two movements intersect and how they can work together and help each other with the Black Lives movement along with the LGBTQ movement.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for one, it's like LGBTQ communities are part of every community, you know? I don't know, for some reason it reminds me of this. I told you I went to Nicaragua in the 80s, and I was there with a delegation, and we met with these women, and what the women talked about was the war. And when we left that meeting, my friend said, I wish we had talked about women's issues. And we had this good discussion about, well, the war is everybody's issue, and it's, you know, there's not some separate, you know, issues that are women's issues in that sense. I don't know if I'm making sense, but, you know, so a lot of white LGBTQ dominated organizations, or white dominated LGBTQ organizations, aren't thinking about, they're thinking about LGBTQ white issues, right? They're not thinking police abuse is an issue, except maybe in the case of trans people. But they are, because it all crosses and intersects, you know. And I think the movement for Black Lives, because it, you know, Black Lives Matter was started by queer Black women. It's like that was something that was very much organic to the movement from the start. And the fact that so many Black and brown trans people are subjected to violence and killing and police brutality You know, it's like when we look at all of the intersections going back to Stonewall. You know, when I first learned about Stonewall, it was depicted as all white people fighting for gay liberation. Then, thank God, people did a little more digging and realized that was completely not the story, and that it was led, you know, very much led by black and brown, trans, and, you know, everybody. It was very much a multiracial uprising, and a class-based uprising too, I think. And so it's a natural intersection. You know, I think the divisions don't make sense, like in terms of, to say, women's issues or black folks' issues. It's like, what about black women? You know, and so, I mean, of course there are issues that black women experience in a different way from black men and from white women, right? So I don't know if I just answered your question or not.
That'll work.
I feel like I'm kind of all over the place.
Well, let's change gears a little bit. Let's talk about your thoughts on what happened with David McAtee.
God, that was just another huge tragedy that could have easily been avoided. I did not know him personally, but I remember seeing him, you know, when I'd be on my way to the Braden Center. And just, honestly, I always remember thinking, God, I gotta stop there one day, you know? You know, for one, the National Guard should never have been called in. But two, it's like, what were they doing there? Coming out like they were in the middle of a war to a barbecue stand in the West End.
Where no protests were taking place at.
Right, where no protests were taking place. You know, I mean, yeah, that was outrageous. I mean, I feel like that the blood of David McAtee is on the mayor and the governor's hands because he agreed to it. And it just such a tragedy, you know? And it's like, if I know they said he fired a couple shots. Well, of course he did. He didn't know what was going on. They were being attacked. You know, they were under attack. Yeah, that was just, it should never have happened, you know? And it's like this thing of whoever made that decision, you know? I mean, so many people, I was there, like, you know, photographing. When the National Guard first came in and were, you know, blocking us and stuff, and so many of those people are like 18-year-old, you know, really young people. And, you know, military jobs like that, it's like, I mean, I felt for those young people, like, this is not what they signed up to do, you know? I mean, I guess you know that it might be a possibility that you're put in that position, but, you know, I always feel like it is the top people who made the decisions who are responsible, and it's not enough to scapegoat the actual person. Like, yes, they're responsible for firing the shots, but it's also these people up here, you know, like our mayor,
right,
who decided that they should be in the streets. And I think it's too easy for them to, you know, maybe decide that they'll name this person or that person, and it's like, no, it's a systemic thing, and it's a leadership issue.
Absolutely. So we also can't forget about Tyler Girth. Did you know him?
I did not know him.
Another photographer.
Yes, a beautiful photographer. I looked at his work. He did landscapes also, and just beautiful, beautiful work, you know. And I know he felt compelled to be part of this movement against racism. And, you know, he had said something, I think a couple days before, about like we know some of us might be killed or something like that. You know, he knew it was pretty high stakes. And that, you know, I mean, I said to his friends who came to see the memorial, you know, he's now one of our ancestors, you know, who made a commitment to fight racism and lost his life in the you know, but we'll remember him. We will remember his commitment and passion and his willingness to show up, you know, and that was really important. Yeah, I mean, there have been a lot of losses. Quite a few people have been killed in the last couple months related to the protests, or had brain damage, or had their eyes put out by police.
To mention arrest records and everything else going on.
Yeah. Yes.
People lost, you know, a lot of people quit their jobs or lost their jobs over it too.
Yes. Or gotten felonies when
Yeah.
they should not have gotten felonies.
We
you know, which
appreciate
will
every one of
impact them. Yeah.
So let's talk about the movement itself a little bit. There's currently a hunger strike going on, and I know you wanted to talk about that. So tell us what's going on with that and your thoughts on it.
Yes, well, these 4 young people chose to go on a hunger strike 13 days ago until the police who killed Breonna are fired. And, you know, hunger strikes, I was trying to find out if there had ever been a hunger strike in Louisville before. I don't know if you know, but
I'm not sure.
Hunger strikes have a long history, a long, very powerful history, and many, many struggles. You know, when I was a teenager and living in overseas, the hunger strike that impacted me the most was Bobby Sands and the IRA hunger strike. And of course, Bobby Sands died on, I think, the 60-something day, but was able to, you know, that had an impact, and that really brought the issue of the British and Ireland and all of it to the fore. So I think it's very impactful. I think it's very courageous. It's truly a sacrifice. And I think some of the power of a hunger strike is that it is a sacrifice, that you're not directly, you know, you're not harming anybody else. You might be harmed. That's a very real possibility. But it's powerful. And I really think it's important to support these folks, because we need all levels of struggle. We need all kinds of tactics. We need to be creative. We need to, and, you know, just because I'm not going to go on a hunger strike for various reasons doesn't mean I can't support them. You know what I mean? We all have a different lane in this struggle, and we can support each other, you know? There's so many different creative, beautiful things happening, powerful things happening, actions, events, you know, conversations, and all of it is necessary. That's what creates this movement. You know, we don't all have to be doing the same thing or thinking the same thing, but we can be in unity.
So with this movement too, we've also seen, obviously, the center is in Justice Square downtown, but we've had marches and protests in the Highlands, St. Matthews, Hurstbourne, Southern Parkway. We had one on Dixie Highway yesterday. We also had a couple in Germantown.
We did.
So you threw those. Were those surge events, or was that just you? Or
no, and it wasn't just me. You know, it started out with actually a childhood friend of mine who also lives in Germantown, Gabrielle Weber. We were talking one day about how there hadn't been anything going on in Germantown as far as we knew. Now, I found out soon after that there's a gathering that happens on Eastern Parkway and Preston Street pretty regularly, so that's awesome. But it came out of that, and the original intention was just to do it once, just to show that people in this neighborhood were also with the struggle for justice for Breonna Taylor, and against racism. And then, there was a lot of enthusiasm. So we did it for a few Sundays in a row. And even though we're not doing it right now, a network has developed from that.
Yeah.
And a bunch of us have gotten to know each other. And some of the folks we've put we've put everybody on the surge list, so they'll know about that stuff. But we're also developing a rapid response signal group, so that people know what's going on. So, yeah, I think it was a productive thing. People who I'd never seen, because, some people are afraid to come out to the big marches for whatever reason, because of COVID, because they've seen the police and the way they behave with the tear gas and the rubber bullets. But they were willing to come out to a neighborhood thing, and some of us are talking about doing some more stuff, but we'll see.
Yeah, keep me in the loop on those, and I'll try to make them.
Yeah, for sure.
And if you're watching this and you haven't seen that, I do have 2 videos on my site from the Germantown protest, so check those out after you're done watching this. So that's pretty much all the questions I have, but I know there was another topic that you wanted to discuss, and that's dealing with evictions coming up. So yeah, go ahead and get into that.
Yeah, I just, unemployment just ran out. For those who were lucky enough to get unemployment, evictions had been frozen for a while, but evictions are happening. And, that is also a really important struggle. That is the very real way people are being affected by this system. And, that's something we need to also be organizing around. And people are organizing around it. But it's happening across the country. I don't even think we can fathom the economic consequences in the next few months.
Yeah.
Because if you just look at Kentucky, almost half of the people in Kentucky live below the poverty level already. Kentucky has tremendous poverty that across lines of class and race. And it's going to get worse. And people without homes, and we're being cut off. And so I just think we have to have an understanding, and I guess this leads me to something else I want to talk about. It's important to have an understanding that this is all part of it, It's not a separate struggle, really. Housing is very central to the fight against white supremacy. Jesus, Trump just came out with that thing about rolling back, basically redlining, and so understanding that it's all really important, and we can lift that up too. It doesn't take away from anything. But I guess there's a couple things I wanted to say. Is that I see a lot of new white people coming into the movement, which is wonderful. And since that's the organizing I do, that's why I'm focusing on that aspect. But I think what is missing from when I was younger is, when I was younger and an activist, like working with the Puerto Rican and the black groups, study groups were something we did. It wasn't optional. If you were going to be involved in this work, you were going to be studying the history. And we would meet every month with our accountability partners. That's not what we called them then, and we would go over this material. And I feel like we need to do more political education for ourselves, for new people joining the movement, the history, but not just the history. It's like part of my awakening came with my mother giving me at 10 years old a book by James Baldwin, who was very involved in the civil rights movement, but also I would say, one of our most brilliant writers ever.
Agreed.
And reading his novels was so important to me in understanding racism and getting insight, as far as that's possible, into, you know, the realities of black families in America, black people in America, but also in terms of how white people are affected by claiming the identity of whiteness and by a system built on white supremacy. I mean, James Baldwin has brilliant insights about all of that. And, you know, he was also a gay writer, you know, and it's like his sensibility. I just like, I mean, he was as important to my formation as an activist as anything else. And I just, you know, I know it's like in modern culture, people aren't doing a lot of reading in the same way, like we read off the internet, but it's so important to gaining that deeper, richer education. And so I think we need to bring it back, you know, and I see in Justice Square they're doing political education every week, and I was really excited to see that. Like, yeah, we all need to be educated, because it's like the activist I was at 20 years old, I thought I knew so much. Luckily, as you get older, you realize, oh wow, yeah, I'm just barely beginning to understand certain things.
Right.
You know, I think it keeps us humble, and it's like we are raised in this absolutely through and through oppressive, white supremacist, male supremacist, homophobic, transphobic, ableist society. And these messages come through the education system, they come through the media, they come through our families, they come through, it's like some kind of poison in the air, right? So we have to do that work of constantly unlearning and learning differently. And none of us are immune to any of it, you know? And so, you know, I think it's really important to realize that when we're working with other people. It's like, don't be pointing the finger out there. And I'm not talking about people in power. I'm talking about our co-activists, our comrades. It's like, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to say things and do things that are problematic. And so we need to keep learning, and we need to be humble, and we need to, you know, lovingly call people in when that happens, and allow ourselves to be called in, you know, and try to listen and take it in when we're called out, especially by black leaders, people of color. It's like people are in a tremendous amount of pain and rage, and you know, we need to listen. I feel like we've heard enough from white folks. I even thought about that when you asked to interview me. I thought, we've heard enough from white folks. But we're still trying to organize, and so it is important. And that's what, you know, I just want more and more white people to show up and commit to the long haul of really changing the system and changing the structures of power and changing these systems of oppression. And, you know, our humanity is at stake. I mean, James Baldwin writes about that, but Ann Braden talked about that too. You know, she says we have to fight racism as if our lives depend on it, because in fact they do. You cannot be in the role of oppressor and not lose your humanity. It's not possible. And so we have to unlearn all that stuff, you know. And I'm not just talking about whiteness. That's central. I'm talking about male supremacy. I'm talking about all of it. It's like we all have so much to learn. And right now that's really exciting to me. It's humbling and it's exciting. And what a way to learn with everything going on.
On the job training.
On the job training, yes. And I have seen some people be really gracious in helping people learn and also in accepting criticism. Yeah. And, you know, we all have to learn to do that more, I think.
Nice. So Is there any social media you want to shout out for yourself, for Surge, or anything?
Yeah, if people want to check out Louisville Showing Up for Racial Justice, we're on Facebook. And I would just say, get involved, figure out what you can give to the movement, how you can be involved, and make it sustainable. Like, this is not just, at some point the protests will probably end. And then what are you going to do? And then where's your commitment? That's, some of the work of organizing is not very exciting. It has its moments. I tell you what, though, the people you will meet by being involved in this struggle, that's what people are missing.
It's invaluable.
Oh my God. I mean, the people I have met, we live in such a segregated society. We're all the, it's like we're all, and then when you're involved in the movement, it's so different, and having those values that connect you, and yeah, it's hard to describe, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. That's why we're here now.
Yes.
So I think that is a beautiful note to end this interview on. Get out there and meet some folks. It's all about unity. So thank you so much for being here, Sonja. Everybody check out Louisville Surge on Facebook. If you're local, get involved. So on that note, again, this is a series that I'm doing, just interviewing people involved with the protest downtown from different perspectives. So this is the fourth in the series. I've reached out to several more I'm working on, waiting to hear back from a few more people, but hopefully, when it's all said and done, I'll have 12 to 15 interviews out there for you guys, just covering all aspects of this. So just look for those. Other than that, I am local independent media. You can support me by liking,
sharing.
Shout
out you.
Commenting, all that stuff helps the algorithm, and that's how we spread the message, and that's how wonderful guests like Sonja get heard out there. So definitely help me out with that. So until next time, always.
I forgot something.
One more thing.
Can
Go
I
ahead.
shout out a person?
Absolutely.
Bob Cunningham, who is a black activist who's now in his 80s. So he can't be out on the streets with us. But many years ago, he adopted me and my sisters when my dad died. He actually came out and told us, they had an agreement that whoever died first, they would have to adopt the other's children. And, he calls me every few days to check in, make sure I'm safe. And, I'll talk over different movement issues because he was an activist his whole life, And I just, that is invaluable, and I just had to bring him in here because he can't be with us out on the street, and he would be if he could be. But that's one of those relationships. I never would have gotten to know this person if it hadn't been for the movement.
Yeah, shout out to Bob Cunningham.
Yes.
Sonja Wilde-de Vries, everyone. And until next time, remember, always think critically.